And one of the things we've explained to our allies in NATO is the United States is not simply focused on Europe. We also have defense needs in the Western Hemisphere. We have defense needs in the Indo-Pacific, and it will require us. We may be the richest country in the world, but we don't have unlimited resources. And as we reassign
exactly
resources,
why we want to have allies and partners to help us as we're looking at conflicts around the world. And when we antagonize our allies and partners, and when we send Canada to do a trade deal with China instead of coming to New Hampshire or the United States, it weakens our ability to confront our adversaries.
Yeah, but our allies have to be two things. They have to be willing to step up, but they also have to be capable of stepping up. And frankly, many of them have not. I mean, Spain is still not doing the 5%. I mean, there are countries that are still not doing. And in fact, Marco Rubio yesterday pointed out that if without the United States, the countries of Europe would have to spend 10% of their GDP for the next 20 years to be able to make up the whole. So I do think there needs to be a rebalancing, and hopefully we'll have cooperation. I think we will. Rute has done a great job of managing all.
And I'm not arguing that point with you. As I said, I agree with what the president has asked of our European allies. What I'm arguing with you about is that his rhetoric is undermining NATO and our partnerships with our allies, and that's a problem.
First, reports are that you've given no-bid licenses to two companies to sell Venezuela's oil. One of them is a massive donor to the president. Second, if Delcy Rodriguez, who is an unelected leader, the head of Maduro's torture operation, is still in power 6 months from now, does that mean that your policy is a success or failure? How do we judge when we've had enough of Rodriguez? And third, in your testimony, you reserved the right to use force again in the future if the Venezuelan government isn't complying with your requests. So if, for instance, they refuse to give you access to the oil in the future, if they said, we're just going to keep it for ourselves, would this cause you to consider military action? And do you concede that if you're using military action simply to try to compel cooperation from the government?
On the first one, the two traders. So here's the problem we faced. The problem we faced in the short term is they had no place to put oil. They were running out of storage capacity for their oil. We had to move that oil to market very quickly. The only way to move it to market very quickly is to plug into these two primary trade companies that could sell it in the open market. For example, Chevron has operations there that never stopped. They seek to expand those operations. They don't need those trading companies. So those trading companies were a short-term fix for a very acute problem because we wanted to prevent societal collapse because they had no money for revenue. On the second point about her being still in power, look, let me say this, a couple things. This is not unprecedented. I can point to a number of places, Spain, Paraguay, two examples of places in which there was a transition, from an autocratic regime to a democratic regime, and it took time. I can't give you a timeline of how long it takes. It can't take forever. On the third point of use of force, look, the president never rules out his options as commander-in-chief to protect the national interest of the United States. I can tell you right now with full certainty, we are not postured to, nor do we intend or expect to have to take any military action in Venezuela at any time. The only military presence you'll see in Venezuela is our Marine Guards at an embassy.
Here's what President Trump said about her, won the Nobel Prize in the aftermath of the attack on Venezuela. I think it would be very tough for her to be the leader. She doesn't have the support within or the respect within the country. She's a very nice woman, but she doesn't have the respect. What did President Trump mean by that?
Yeah. First of all, I've known Maria Corina for probably 12 years, 13 years. Have dealt with her probably more than anybody, as much as anybody on this committee has for certain. And I'll be meeting with her today, in fact. And we met with her a couple weeks ago. So here's the reality, though, and I think what the president was pointing to. And I think Maria Corina would acknowledge this.
I talked to her last week.
Well,
she's very disappointed in those comments, and so are Venezuelans in my state.
Okay, well, she didn't share that with me or with us, but I would say this to you. For the president is acknowledging is that today, as it stands, whether we like it or not, the elements of control in that country, the people with the guns, the people that control the guns and the institutions of government there are in the hands of this regime. So we either, on the one hand, we're getting criticized. Some people are saying we don't want regime change. On the other hand, we're being criticized for not undertaking regime change.
Mr. Secretary,
what we're trying to trigger here is a process of stabilization, recovery, and transition to something where Maria Corina and others can be a part of.
You have respect for her, don't you?
Sure.
That we still have a repressive regime in power in Venezuela, suppressing human rights, yet we are cooperating with them We are funding them, and we're not calling out the ridiculousness of the violence that's going on there. At the same time, we're taking people who have lived in our country for years and years and years and sending them back into that hell where they can be targeted, where they can be abducted, where they can be held for hostage because they know they have American family members that are still here. This is a situation ripe for where we are being complicit in continuing human rights violations, and that needs to stop. And I think
just on 2 points, we're not cooperating with them to continue doing what they're doing now. We're cooperating with them to transition away from what's happening now. And as I said, we're not even 4 weeks into this thing. And if it continues to look like this in 6 months, 9 months, a year from now, if progress isn't being made, we'll have very different feelings about it. But what we're cooperating on is not the continuation of what's happening. It's a movement away from all this and transitioning ultimately to something that looks nothing like this. That's the goal. But it's been less than 4 weeks. I mean, we think we've made substantial progress in a very short period of time. But I acknowledge we want to make a lot more progress. This is not the end state that we want.
But I know the president's very concerned about what's happening to the demonstrators in Iran. And of course, there's some estimates that as many as 30,000 Iranian demonstrators have been executed by the regime. But I know the president's being presented with a range of options. We notice a lot of movement into the region by our Navy and other authorities. But what happens if the supreme leader is removed in Iran? What happens next?
Well, that's an open question. I mean, no one knows who would take over. Obviously, their system is divided between the supreme leader and the IRGC that responds directly to him. And then you've got these, quasi-elected individuals, the ones that wear the suits on television who are part of their political branches, but ultimately have to run everything they do by the supreme leader. So I don't think anyone can give you a simple answer as to what happens next in Iran if the supreme leader and the regime were to fall, other than the hope that there would be some ability to have somebody within their systems that you could work towards a similar transition. I would imagine it would be even far more complex than the one we're describing now, because you're talking about a regime that's in place for a very long time. The baseline is this. We have 30 to 40,000 American troops stationed across 8 or 9 facilities in that region. All are within the reach. Theoretically, not theoretically, in reality, all are within the reach of an array of thousands of Iranian one-way UAVs and Iranian short-range ballistic missiles that threaten our troop presence. We have to have enough force and power in the region, just on a baseline, to defend against that possibility. That at some point, as a result of something, the Iranian regime decides to strike at our troop presence in the region. The president always reserves the preemptive defensive option. In essence, if we have indications that, in fact, they're going to attack our troops in the region, to defend our personnel in the region. I didn't remember
the president has already said that he's ready to put American troops in Venezuela.
No, I think the president has said that he retains the right as commander-in-chief to protect the United States against any imminent threats. Maybe that involves troops, maybe that involves air power. We hope, but we don't anticipate that being the case in Venezuela.
I worry that you are playing fast and loose with our nation.
Well, I just gave you testimony here.
I just want to conclude by
saying, but I just gave you testimony of how well things are moving forward, not as fast as everybody would like.
But you also said that in 6 or 9 months, if things don't go well, you're going to have to do something else. And the president's already said that he's not ruled out the military option. And you've also just said that, yes, we are at war. The president has wartime powers.
Every president retains the power to use military to protect.
So it's reasonable for me to ask you.
And I gave you a very specific example. Every president retains the right to defend the United States against an imminent threat. Yes, if there are just give you an example, Iranian drones deployed in Venezuela that could threaten the United States, we most certainly will address that, even if it's located in Venezuela. But we hope we don't get to that point. We don't expect to get to that point. I don't think that we're not trending in that direction. That's a fact. But that said, on the one hand,
people of America are worried that this is a president who engages in yet another forever war, Mr. Secretary.
There's also VTOL. They've been given a license for Venezuelan oil worth about $250 million. VTOL's senior partner, John Addison, gave $6 million to the Trump-aligned PACs in the last cycle. And the list goes on, Mr. Secretary. And I have to say that when you have the President of the United States himself, after taking Maduro, get up and say this was about oil, 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 it does make all of us ask the question whether he put men and women in the U.S. military at risk simply so he could grab that oil.
Well, yeah, and I don't know if you were here. I think you were here the whole hearing. I don't think you had left. Number one, the only reason why we use TRAFI and VTOL is simply because in the short term, we had to move 50 million barrels of oil that were stuck. And Venezuela needed to turn that into cash so that they wouldn't have systemic collapse. And the fastest way to do it in the short term is for the traders to do it because that's in the business that they're in. That is not the permanent structure. The permanent structure we want to see is a normal oil industry where it's sold directly. Companies have licenses down there. They have an arrangement to pay royalties, and they move the oil directly to their refineries or sell it in the global market, not through middlemen.
Yeah.
The only reason why they were used in this instance is because we had an acute short-term problem, which is how do we provide funding from their own revenue, not ours, to keep their government afloat. So in essence, we allowed Venezuela to use their own oil to generate revenue to pay teachers and firefighters and police officers and keep the function of government operating so we didn't have systemic collapse. But that system with those traders, that is not the long-term plan here at all.
My only point, Mr. Secretary, is those folks who gave a lot of money to the Trump campaign have done very well as a result of what's happened.